Welcome to the STARS program, seniors taking active roles in society. And now, here's your host, Anita Finley.
You know, in everybody's life, there are times when people's hearts are broken. And I saw a book about a year ago, and I just really appreciated it so much. And we were so fortunate to have it made it into a book of the month. And it's called Finding Peace When Your Heart is in Pieces, a step-by-step guide to the other side of grief, loss, and pain. And it's by Dr. Paul Coleman, who is actually calling in today. He lives outside of New York City, and it's so great to talk to someone with his experience. I mean, I think you've written a lot more books, but this, I don't know what your other books are, because this is the only one that I've really had the privilege of reading, but you really have helped people, and I think you know that. Besides in your consultations, do you understand what this book really has meant to people?
Well, thank you so much for those kind words. It's what I want to have happen. You know, you reach a point in life where you just want to make a difference. You don't care how you do it. And it's nice to know that the book is reaching people and helping people, complete strangers to me, in ways that might not have happened otherwise. So
yeah. And how long did it actually take you to write the book?
Well, there's two parts. There's what's called the book proposal, and that's the longest part, because that's where you have to prepare anywhere from a 50 to 80-page document, where you have to outline the book and give a sample chapter. You have to tell the publisher how you intend to help market it. You have to describe the book. And it takes a long time to get that proposal perfect so that a publisher will be interested. Once you get a publisher, they told me, you know, you have to write it within 4 to 5 months. But by that time, you know, I knew where the book was going. So it's a lot easier to write it after an outline.
Well, and of course you talk to people all the time. That's what you do. People whose hearts have been broken. And this isn't just from people who have had losses of death. I mean, it's from all sorts of things. That's what I loved about your book. You were able to equate something that maybe we don't think is serious as losing a loved one as something that maybe, you know, it's just not in the same caliber, but yet you say in your book it is.
Well, anytime the bottom gets pulled out from under you, and you know that afterwards your life is going to be changed. It could be a health crisis, you know, a serious health crisis. It could be a job loss where you have to change careers or your income is going to be slashed. It could be the loss of a loved one. It could be a relationship breakup. There's many kinds of losses, and they follow a similar pattern when you try to learn how to cope with those losses. There's things that you can expect to occur and things that you probably want to try to do to help you along. And it doesn't matter what the loss is.
Well, and I wasn't going to talk about this on the radio, but it was since the talk that you and I had before, we've had an outstanding physician who is a CEO of a major hospital district here in South Florida. And he was the charmer, the smartest, the best. And all of a sudden, we saw in the newspapers that he had shot himself in the chest, killed himself. And I thought to myself, I didn't even know that there was anything wrong with him. I mean, I'm still hardly over it. And I wondered if I had given him this book. But I mean, when it takes so much for someone to commit suicide of his caliber, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, we don't understand everybody's, you know, personal concerns that they have. I've seen a lot of people over the years who on the outside are very popular or well-known, or they're CEOs, and they look like they have a great life. And then they tell me their story, and it's very clear that they're struggling. So it's not surprising that might happen. I don't know, you know, you say, gee, if I had given him a book. You know, it's interesting when someone commits suicide or someone dies suddenly for any reason, people who care about that person always think about what could I have done differently to make that not happen. And it isn't usually a helpful type of thought process because there's so many factors involved. You know, we all like to believe that we can prevent tragedy or calamity if we just do the right thing. But the truth is, we can't. We do the best we can with what we know at the time, but there's always going to be surprises.
And I'm sure in your profession and sitting and and listening to people, as a professional, you wonder, if they hadn't come to you, what they would have done.
Well, it's interesting. Why do things happen the way they do? How do people come to see a professional for help that makes a positive difference? Why did they go to that professional? Not every professional is the same, But then there are other random events. Here's a very quick story. I was speaking to one of my clients who today is off to officers training school in the military. And this was her dream. And she's at an age where if she didn't do it now, she wouldn't be able to do it. However, through most of her 20s, she was under the impression that she didn't have what it took, partly because that was what her family said. And so she said to me a couple of weeks ago before she left, she said, how did I get to this place where I'm now doing what I've always wanted to do but never thought I was capable of doing? And yes, we talked about therapy because in the last year she's been working hard to apply and get her physicals done and everything. But she said something fascinating to me, which was that 7 years ago, she had worn braces. She bought her own braces for her teeth. 7 years ago, she was moving out of an apartment, and her mother was helping her move, and her mother lost this young lady's retainer. All right, a simple thing like that. And so for years, she didn't have this retainer. And then about 3 or 4 years ago, her teeth were starting to get crooked again. So she had to go back to the orthodontist, get a retainer, another $2,500. But in the process of that, she met one of the secretaries there who was about her age. They became fast friends. They started going to the gym together. And then they decided they wanted to run races. And they practiced for 5Ks and 10Ks and half marathons. And it was because she did those things and accomplished those things, she felt confident that she could go into the military. So she said to me, thank goodness I lost my retainer. And what is fascinating even more so, she had that insight while driving home from my appointment 2 weeks ago. She's in her car saying, how did I get here? And then she realized it's because I lost my retainer. I never would have met my friend otherwise. She goes home. She starts to pack for her trip, and she finds the lost retainer 7 years later. And she said to me, the retainer had to get lost. It had to get lost in order for me to do this. And now I found it, and I don't need it anymore because it's done its job. And so she said, from now on, if I have a major setback and I feel like things are not going well, I'm going to say, no, this is just another retainer that's been lost.
Wow.
Maybe something will happen later, and I'll go, aha, this is why this had to happen. So maybe that's why some people end up in a certain therapist's office and not another therapist. Why do things unfold the way they do? It's a very interesting question.
Yeah, it is, and you're really in the thick of it. And I don't know if I asked you this before, but what made you get into this field? Why? I mean, you're very smart. You could have been anything. Why this?
Well, first of all, what I didn't understand growing up, everyone would come to me with their problems. All my friends in grade school would come to me. I have 4 older sisters, and the youngest above me is 5 years older, and the oldest above me is 19 years older. And when I was in 7th and 8th grade, my older sisters who had boyfriend problems would come to me, and I had no clue why they would do that. So I guess part of it was in my makeup. But the big thing that happened was when I was a junior in high school, class went on a tour of a facility, a campus that housed people who were severely disabled, mentally or physically disabled. And these are people who could not be cared for at home. And we went and we toured the infirmary, and in this infirmary was a crib. And inside the crib was a young boy. about 3 years old. And a year before that, I had a nephew that passed away at age 2, very suddenly. So this young boy looked to be about the same age as my nephew. And all he did was breathe. We were told that that's his life. He's not going to do anything more than just breathe.
Huh.
And he probably had a few more years to live. And as the class moved on, I stayed back. And I talked to him. He couldn't hear me. And I put my hand on his back, and I just wanted to see if he would react. And I wondered, would anyone ever pick him up just to hold him? I had nephews and nieces. I have his 4 older sisters. So I was an uncle 9 times by that age. So holding a 3-year-old was nothing unusual for me. And I was talking to him, but he didn't hear me. So I left, but he never left me. He stayed with me in my mind. And I realized I wanted to do something that was going to help people who had a hard time helping themselves. And I realized that while this young boy's life on the surface seemed to possess no meaning, it had meaning for me. He became a catalyst for me to go into a health field. I didn't know what the field was going to be. So his life had a significant meaning for me. And it's random things, right? It's like the retainer, or it's like someone showing up in a particular therapist's office. If I wasn't in school that day, or he wasn't in his crib at that moment, weren't touring the infirmary, I might not have done that. And then the next year in high school, we had a new teacher, and he was teaching a new course called Introduction to Psychology, and I fell in love, and I've never looked back.
That's a fascinating story. I can see why you're so good at what you do, because when people sit with you and they share their emotions and their fears, then you can relate a lot of this to them, and that's, I'm sure they feel so comfortable with you, and that's why you are the professional you are. That's a glorious story. Glorious story.
It's a wonderful story. Yes, I know. That inspired me. So
yeah,
you never know where your inspiration is going to come from.
And I bet there are a lot of other inspirational stories that people have, and maybe they don't see it that way as you did.
Oh, that's what I write about in my book. One of my chapters is called The Path of Inspiration. I talk about 4 pathways we go on after a major upheaval. And in the path of inspiration, we have to be open to signs or to ideas that may be trying to tell us something. But sometimes we're grieving so much, or we're so upset, or we're so scared, we don't detect those signs. And I say we have to get to a calm place. It's like detecting the ripple of a leaf on a lake that falls on a lake. The lake has to be calm. Otherwise, you're not going to notice the ripple. If there's a lot of rain, you're not going to notice the ripple. The rain represents our mind chatter. The more chatter we have, the more fear we have, the more grief we have, we may not detect the small ripple, because sometimes that ripple is a sign or a phrase or a thought that's meant to help guide us that we don't see.
Yeah, that's that. So you have to take the time to really realize what's out there, and a lot of people don't, and they're sometimes so deep in grief that that's all they can think about. And so what you've just said is maybe you have to really open up your eyes, open up your heart, and wonder, why is this happening to you, and what is good about it? Even though it sounds terrible at the time, there must be some good things that can come out of this.
Yes, you may not know it at the time, you may not know when, but if you believe, without knowing the how or the why, that this can ultimately, you can learn something that can be helpful, or you will undertake a task that will help you and help others, that good can come from it, even though maybe it's unfair what happened, or tragic what happened, then it makes whatever happened has some kind of meaning to it. Like that young boy in the crib,
right.
I'm sure his family felt, his life was useless. Well, it was not useless for me at all. And maybe there was a person who worked there who would go home at night, appreciate family and their kids, because they had to take care of this young boy who had no life at all. That's a meaningful life. It's not what we would consider meaningful, but it did have an impact. The point is, we all have an impact. Every one of us is a catalyst. What impact do you want to make? What is the impact you want to leave? And if we can think about that on a daily basis, not just over the course of a lifetime, not what do we want to have an impact when we leave this earth, what impact do you want to have today? How can it be a positive one? If you think like that, you realize your life has meaning.
Yeah, that's. I was thinking as you were talking that I've had things in my life like that. But, and then just getting back to your book, which is, of course, called "Finding Peace When Your Heart Is in Pieces: A Step-by-Step Guide to the Other Side of Grief, Loss, and Pain." So, would you say that death is probably the hardest pain that someone can feel, or not so?
I think the real issue is the meaning that we give to these losses. When my mother passed away, she was 92 years old, and she had dementia, and we were all happy for her that she could pass on. We were sad for ourselves, but it wasn't a tragedy. When my nephew died at age 2, that was a tragedy. That was so much more painful, particularly for my sister, who was my nephew's mom. So there are people who, like I said, I'm seeing a gentleman now. He's in his 30s. He had an accident, a fall. He had several broken vertebrae, and he basically is in constant pain. He's unable to work. Insurance companies are not paying for things he needs, and he'll never work again. And his girlfriend broke up with him. He doesn't have enough money to pay for his house, so his house, right? So his pain, at times he would say, death would be a relief. Now he's not suicidal, but for him, his situation is much more painful than a death. So it really depends on how the circumstances are and how we interpret it.
Yeah, I hear you. I just heard what you said. Well, and then the other part about, because I love the story about your mother, and that is true, and the fact that you've even had such a loving mother. So many people don't get that opportunity, and so I'm listening to you, and I'm always thinking about things that I say to people, and but you're the master at this. You have written a lot of other books. What were your other books like?
Well, they're all progressing. In the early days, my first couple of books had a kind of a higher level spiritual focus, not religious, but tried to tap into the higher qualities. My first book was called The Forgiving Marriage. It was published in 1989. And my second book was called Life's Parachutes: How to Land on Your Feet During Trying Times. Those books are long out of print. But then what happened is publishers would say, gee, we want you to write a book on how to have a better marriage. So I started writing marriage books, and it was all kind of formulaic, like do A, do B, do C, and you'll get to a better marriage. And while those were very helpful, and I'm proud of them, I didn't have the passion for it because it's oversimplified the situation. I wanted to go back to writing books that elevated the human spirit, not just gave somebody a how-to manual to communicate better, even though that's valuable if you can understand that difference. And then as I got older, I think a lot of us, when we get older, we become a little more spiritually focused. Like, what's this all meaning? What's life mean? Why am I here? What's the purpose of my life now that my children are raised, for example? So I really wanted to write this last book, Finding Peace When Your Heart Is in Pieces. And I don't think I'm ever going to write a formulaic book again. If the publisher said, hey, we want you to write a new book on how to have a good marriage, I'd say, thanks, but no thanks. Been there, done that. I want something that's going to inspire people, not just give them a cookbook, right?
Right.
So I think that my books represent my own personal development as well. So.
Well, just following along with that. So when people do decide that they're going to have therapy, when do they know it's enough?
When do they know it's enough therapy?
Yeah. Now, there are people that go on for years. Now, what is that all about?
Oh, well, that's an interesting question. If it's going on for years, I mean, unless we're talking someone has just an ongoing struggle to cope because their life circumstances are such that it's just going to be hard to do that, then I think some people can get a little bit addicted to therapy because it's like having a paid friend. And I'm always concerned with something like that because, believe it or not, therapy can become an obstacle to change if you're not careful. Because people can feel better enough by venting to their therapist that they don't really change anything when they leave the office, right? So they might have an unhappy marriage. They come in and they say, "Oh, my spouse, my this, my that." They feel a little bit better. They go home and they'll tolerate the status quo. But the status quo isn't very good. They're not very happy with it. So they come back in the following week and they vent and they feel better. It's like having a drink at the end of the day for your problems. It doesn't make the problems go away. It makes you tolerate the problems, right? But it doesn't make it go away. So you have to ask people, do you want change or do you want maintaining the status quo?
Ah.
And it's interesting because a lot of people say they want change.
Yeah.
They don't. They don't want to do the work of change because they're scared. Because sometimes change might mean leaving a spouse, for example.
Ah.
They don't want to do that for understandable reasons. Maybe they can't afford it or they have children, but they know they're miserable. Or it might mean leaving a job that they hate, but they don't want to take a salary cut, right? So then they have to come in therapy to help me cope with my horrible job, which I'm never going to leave, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's okay.
Yes, but what you do is you at least get them an opportunity to look at what their problems are. Isn't that true? And then they have to make their own decision.
They do have to make their own. I'll just tell them the truth. I'll say, and I can't guarantee that if they make a dramatic change, they're going to feel better. Very often when we make a dramatic change, we feel worse right away, initially, because we're kind of jumping into the unknown, and we're more scared. You quit your job and say, I'm gonna take up oil painting. Well,
right.
That's a big challenge.
That is.
Or I'm going to relocate. I'm going to move to California, and I'm going to find a job.
Right.
And I'll figure it out when I get there. Okay?
Yeah. Right.
Good luck.
Yeah. Right. Well, this is so very interesting. There are so many people in society, of course, today who are like to blame other people, and I think that's what you must get when you have to just make them realize it's not other people, it's really you.
That's the ultimate truth. Other people could be toxic. Other people could be bad. Other people can be hurtful. There's no question about that. But when the person is in my office saying, I'm hurting because of these bad people or these bad situations, it has to go back to, so what are you willing to do differently? And sometimes they just want to blame, And if you do that too quickly, they might feel offended. They might feel like you don't understand what they're going through. So initially you might be very sympathetic and say, yeah, that's really terrible. That's really hard. You're in a really tough position. You're in a marriage that's unhappy, but you have young kids, and you can't afford to move on. I get that. But at some point, you have to make a decision, and you have to look at yourself and take responsibility for your choices. And a lot of people don't do that. We don't do that in society very well. It's always somebody else's fault. The political parties do the same thing. Everybody else is to blame, not me. And as long as that's the case, we're not going to have real change.
Well, it's wonderful that you had this great experience and that you've been able to take your soul. See, you're different, though. You had the experience, but you made it into an experience. A lot of other people could have just walked by that child, but it was all there for you. It just needed something to awaken you, right?
Yes, and I think we want to be open to being awakened, and I think we could have that every day, or it could happen more frequently, but we have to be open to it. And how many times do we see something that nudges us to say, I've always wanted to go and do this, or this is something I really should do something about. But I'll do it tomorrow, or I'll do it next week.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't. They resist. They avoid. Everyone wants to write the great novel, and they want to start writing tomorrow. They never sit down and do it today. Right? So We have to wonder. And the longer I live, I don't think anything is an accident. If something comes up and it gets my attention, and certainly if it gets my attention more than once and it seems totally random, I don't think it's random. I say, what's going on here? Is there a message here for me? Or what can I learn from this? Or what is this tugging out of me? And usually there's an answer, and I follow it.
Yeah, you are so special. I just want to tell everybody, this is Dr. Paul Coleman. He's a psychologist in private practice for more than 20 years, specializes in grief, anxiety, trauma, intuition development, and rebuilding relationships. He's the author of 12 books and has appeared on national television shows, including Oprah Today, Geraldo, and Fox's The Morning Show with Mike and Juliet, as well as in Cosmopolitan and Parenting magazines. Dr. Coleman is a member of numerous professional organizations, and he lives outside of New York City. And we're talking about his book, which was a wonderful book for our Book of the Month in the January issue of Boomer Times, and it's called Finding Peace When Your Heart is in Pieces, a step-by-step guide of the other side of grief, loss, and pain. So you really, what I like is you do have a step-by-step guide in a lot of issues. I remember one of your chapters, which was the early reactions to loss. And it just shows, as you said, you struggle to accept what cannot be changed. And it's in that acceptance, though, is the way that you get to change.
That's one of the first steps. If we don't accept a reality, then we can't really move forward. And reality always wins those battles. We're fighting reality. Reality wins every time. So we have to emotionally accept something. It can take a while, particularly if there's a passing or a death. That's that phrase, I can't get it through my head. And that's true. So we have to kind of emotionally accept it. Once we can do that, now we can venture forth in a more meaningful way.
And would this, and I guess we're kind of run out of time, but I wanted to ask you about, support groups and how valuable. You know what? I would love to have you on another time in the future, if I may call you, because you really are a major source of comfort, and I know to our listeners, and I so appreciate your taking the time.
Well, I'm delighted to. I've always enjoyed speaking with you, and you're welcome to call me at any time.
Dr. Coleman, you're terrific. Okay, well, thank you, and we will get back to you, I promise.
Okay, thank you very much.